Well, good morning. I should say good afternoon from Central Virginia. It's a very sunny but very cold day out there. We're supposed to be getting quite a snowstorm late Saturday afternoon, and we're going to get hit again on Sunday. I've heard we're supposed to be getting 2 inches of snow, and some people are saying we're supposed to get up to 8 inches of snow. So I have no idea. Um, when it comes over the mountains, that's when things can really change. You can end up in one county where you get 3 or 4 inches of snow very quickly, and then 15 miles away you get a dusting. So they say if you don't like the weather in Virginia, wait 10 minutes, it'll change. But anyway, I just was reading a few things on the news. One of the big things now they're talking about tariffs. Okay, a tariff is a tax, plain and simple. If you put a tax on something made in China and it's sold in the United States, the Chinese government doesn't pay that. The people who buy the product will pay it. Sure, in the short run, the importer will pay it. And for a while they might absorb the cost, but eventually it's going to get passed on in a higher price. Um, a lot of Republicans don't seem to understand that. A lot of Democrats also don't understand when you raise corporate income taxes, that gets passed on to people. I think back to when Barack Obama was president and he said, well, we're going to raise the tax on oil companies because the gas is too expensive. People are like, yay. What did the oil companies do? They just passed it on so you paid more at the pump. Corporations basically don't pay taxes. It gets passed on in one form or another. The consumer ends up paying for it. Um, then you've got the issue with subsidies. That's a big thing in Virginia now with our new governor, Abigail Spanberger. Spanberger. I keep saying Spamberger. It's Spanberger. Spanberger. No disrespect intended. It just comes out that way. Sorry about that, but nevertheless, uh, she wants to constrict the energy production matrix in Virginia and move us away from so-called fossil fuels, which I refer to as natural energy. But nevertheless, she wants to make it so that after 2035, 10, that's 9 years from now, following California's standards, we wouldn't be able to buy a gasoline or diesel powered vehicle. I don't know how that's supposed to work. She's constricting the energy production, mandating wind and solar, which have a niche, but they're not going to fill in what coal, natural gas, and oil and nuclear can do. Um, we're going to run into a problem because we're increasing demand and we are constricting supply, which leads to higher prices. Her answer is apparently, well, we're just going to give people subsidies. Well, how did that work for Obamacare? You don't make anything cost less by subsidizing it. You transfer the cost or the price from one person to another. And, like this thing with the Obamacare subsidies that have been constantly raised to benefit the billion-dollar corporations the Democrats say that they hate. So if Obamacare worked, you wouldn't need to keep adding more subsidies. But what you're doing is you're the person getting the subsidy doesn't see an increase, but the rest of us pay for it through taxes. It's kind of like people who live in New York City and they live in rent controlled apartments. The landlord can't raise their rent, they're locked into it. Well, they think it's great. It makes it more affordable. Who can afford an apartment? Well, that also reduces the number of people who are willing to invest to build more apartments. Um, you can't, politicians for a period of time can manipulate an economy, but they can't change the laws of economics. Eventually, it's like crossing a rattlesnake with a boomerang. It comes back around to bite you. You can manipulate things for a period of time, but things always find a level of equilibrium. Look at the thing with raising the minimum wage. Well, we want to raise the minimum wage so that it can make things more affordable and people can afford to buy more things. Well, the problem is then all those things that are in the production that everybody else uses, that cost goes up. You have to pay the guy in the warehouse more. And then people who already make more than minimum wage, when you artificially increase the minimum wage, Some guy may be working somewhere 8, 9, 10 years, has a certain level of experience. Now he's going to want more money. So if you bring in the minimum wage, say 15, just say it's 15 and you make it 20, well, then the guy making 20 or 25, he's going to want 30. The guy making $30 an hour is going to be entitled to 35. The guy making 35 or $40 an hour, in that chap, is he's going to want 50. You're going to have a situation called wage compression. It's where people are brought in at the lower level at artificially higher wages, and the people who've been there a long time, they kind of get screwed because their actual net buying power is decreased. So you find that a lot in public service jobs, like with teachers and firefighters and police officers. The cost of hiring new people is much higher than it used to be. So the people at the top, yes, they're making more money, but their differential is wrong. Also, what people don't tell you, remember, there's things in the news they tell you, and there's things they don't tell you. One of the things they don't tell you is that the people pushing for the minimum wage a lot of times are unions. And you might say, well, you know, union people make more than minimum wage. Why would they care about minimum wage? Well, many union contracts, especially those with government, are based on a multiple of the minimum wage. So you may have people working somewhere where they automatic their base rate might be 3 times the minimum wage. So if the minimum wage is $10 an hour, the union guy is going to be making 30. If that minimum wage goes to 15, then the union guy automatically gets a raise to 45 an hour. Now I'm just pulling numbers out of my butt, but you get the point. They get an artificial increase in the wage that they're entitled to, even though they didn't get a raise. So then what happens is the governments need to raise taxes to fund the higher costs of labor when they have a project done, like a road or a bridge or a building or something along that line. Well, then that ends up driving the cost of everything else. Then you add in the Federal Reserve System, through the government printing money that's not backed by anything. So it's like we need to print more money so that people can afford to pay the higher prices for things, but that ends up making the prices higher. It reminds me of a story that my grandmother told me back in the 70s. She and my grandfather had big cars. She had a Mercury Marquis. It was like a big boat. My grandfather had a Lincoln Continental. Basically, they were on the same body. The Lincoln was just a little nicer, but they had these big V8 engines in them. And my grandmother, who never had a traffic ticket in her life. She was driving rather fast and she got pulled over by a police officer. And he said, I pulled you over because you were speeding. Is there any reason you're going so fast? And she said, well, my gas gauge is really low. I'm running low on gas, and I wanted to hurry up and get to the gas station before I ran out. That's kind of the thinking, that we can just print our way out of inflation, but that ends up causing it. And this is politicians on both parties who are guilty of it. Nixon was a big culprit when he took us off the gold standard in 1971. But Donald Trump is urging the Fed to lower interest rates, which is going to, I understand he wants increased economic activity, and no president wants to raise interest rates. But the long-term secondary and tertiary effects of that will be that it causes inflation throughout the whole economy. Now, you can have price inflation, which is often market-based. Like if there's a hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico and it knocks an oil refinery offline, well, then prices will go up because there's a short-term shortage. Or if there's years ago, there was a place where they made antifreeze, and I think they had a fire or an explosion. So there was a shortage of antifreeze, and prices went up until more of it was made, more companies entered the market, production was increased, and you had a level of equilibrium. The price came back down. That's price inflation. If you go to rent a room at a hotel in Virginia Beach in June or July, you're going to pay twice as much as you will to rent one in November. That's inflation based upon demand. That's fluctuations in the economy. But monetary inflation is far more pernicious it becomes systemic because it affects everything. It doesn't just affect one area of the economy, although the price of energy does filter on down to other things because everything arrives by truck, train, or ship, which all use diesel fuel. But that's another issue for another day. When you debauch the currency, you have debauchery of the currency. You print paper money, and a lot of it's digital now. It's not just white paper with green ink on it. It's digital. Money just gets pushed into the economy. We saw this during COVID, and all of a sudden everybody started wondering why things got expensive. Well, that I remember when you could go to Burger King and get a Whopper with a small fry and a Coke, and it was $2.99 for a combo. Now that'll cost you about $11, probably more in some areas of the country. Wages have gone up too. I mean, I remember minimum wage back then was $3.35. Minimum wage now, in the federal minimum wage is $7.25. But many states, the de facto minimum wage in Virginia is probably about $15 an hour already. But there is no, as far as I see it, the federal government does not have the constitutional authority to establish wages and prices. I know they do anyway, but it's not in Article 1, Section 8 where they can do that. There's something where they can set the value of money, but not wages or prices. I know they did it, but it's also bad economics because a minimum wage in an area of the United States, how is that going to work? You could have a place like, Dothan, Alabama, or, Money, Mississippi, or someplace like that. If you're making $15 an hour, you could probably do pretty well. You make $15 an hour in Los Angeles or San Francisco, and you're going to be living in a cardboard box under a bridge. You have some places in rural Kentucky, you can buy a little 2-bedroom house for $75,000 or $80,000. It won't be the Taj Mahal, but you can. It's a good starter home. It's a roof over your head. It's a place to sleep at night, and you would have a kitchen and 2 bedrooms, and you might even have half an acre of land. But you go to San Francisco and you're going to pay $1.5 million for a little bungalow. So trying to have one wage for the whole United States is not only unconstitutional, it's just bad economics. Our country is too big for these one size fits all programs that come out of DC, which is why our founding fathers designed a constitutional republic with divided government. Separate, you have the judicial, the executive, and the legislative branches of the federal government, separation of powers. But you also have vertical separation of powers, not just horizontal. You've got your municipalities, your state, your town, your village, your township, whatever state you live in, your city. Then you've got your county government, the sheriff, the jail, maybe the police department, stuff like that, the county school system. Then above that, you've got your state government. You've got your governor, your state legislators, and your state courts. And then above that, you have the federal government with the president. The federal government is only supposed to do things that the states cannot do. It's not supposed, the president is not supposed to be a king. We're not supposed to have this one size fits all top down authoritarian government. It doesn't work that way. The founding fathers designed it where the states gave the federal government certain limited and enumerated powers. But I don't want to give you a civics lesson today, but we're so far out of whack. It shouldn't matter to most of us who the president is unless we are at war. The president is the commander in chief of the armed forces. He's not supposed to be the dictator. And that applies to Republicans or Democrats. They're not supposed to rule by executive order. And that's not in the Constitution either. Just like lifetime appointments for Supreme Court judges are not in the Constitution either. They're only supposed to serve during times of good behavior. And Supreme Court justices can be impeached just like the president. A lot of people don't realize that. There's also nothing in the Constitution that says it has to be 9. That just seems to be the Goldilocks number. 7 wouldn't be enough and 11 would be too many. So it just sort of became 9 judges, but that's not actually in the Constitution. But I digress. Greenland. A lot of people are really angry at the United States right now, especially in Europe, because Trump seems to be sounding like a bully on Greenland. He's not going to send the U.S. military in to invade Greenland. He's not doing that. what he's trying to do, I believe he's trying to troll people and get people to think, okay, Greenland is sort of part of Denmark, not unlike how American Samoa is part of the United States. It's kind of out there. It's not connected to it, but Greenland is closer to New York than it is to Copenhagen. I'm pretty sure. Greenland is actually it's the largest island in the world, and it's actually part of the North American continent. So the United States does have a vested interest in Greenland, but that doesn't mean we should take it over. I believe that uh, persuasion and logic will always defeat force and coercion. We don't need to take Greenland by force. If we can convince the people running Greenland that, hey, maybe they should be a sovereign protectorate of the United States instead of Denmark, because NATO and Denmark don't have the wherewithal to protect Greenland. The United States does. Now, the purpose is not just to take over Greenland, it's to keep Greenland from falling into the wrong hands. China and Russia, as well as I'm sure some of the Middle Eastern Islamic countries, have their eyes on Greenland because it is chock full of lots of rare earth minerals and metals. There's a lot of natural resources in Greenland, even though it's a pretty inhospitable area. But to show a force where the Germans and Denmark and I think it was Belgium and maybe Finland, they sent like a plane load of troops up there to land there, and they're wearing woodland camouflage. They're wearing camouflage as if they were in the woods, which wouldn't do a lot of good in Greenland. And then it seems like they left as fast as they got there. But the United States has had a presence at the Thule Air Force Base probably since the 1950s. It's now, I think they call it Prufnik or something. Pufner starts with a P. Pufnik is the name of it now, but it used to be called Thule, Thule. And that was our base in Greenland. It was part of the NORAD system where we could keep an eye on the Soviet Union. Well, what's the way to go about doing this? Well, you get Greenland, which only has 56,000 people. There are counties in Virginia that have more than that, but there's no way they can defend it. Greenland, I think they have a Coast Guard or something. They really don't have a military to speak of. And Denmark, I was there twice. I love Copenhagen. Denmark. It's a beautiful country, big beautiful people. Yeah, they're a great place, but they don't have the wherewithal to defend Greenland. Does NATO have an obligation to defend Greenland? Well, they're not really. Greenland is not a member of NATO. You could say that because they're affiliated with Denmark, that they kind of are. The Canary Islands off the coast of Africa, they're sort of part of Spain. If somebody attacked the Canary Islands, would that be an attack on Spain? I don't know. But I suspect that we're going to work out some kind of deal up there where it's going to be a win-win for everybody. The Greenland people, if they could set it up, maybe have U.S. corporations involved in that, mining operations. If the people got a nice cut of the pie, that would be beneficial to them. You would have a military and a commercial business presence up there. I'm just thinking out loud. I don't know what's on the mind of the president, but Greenland is worth it to be able to defend it. It also is in the strategic interest of the United States and the entire Western Hemisphere. So if the global warming people are correct and the ice is melting up there, that means that Vladimir Putin could send the Russian Navy almost straight over the North Pole. And that doesn't just affect the United States. There's also Canada and everybody else in the Western Hemisphere. If missiles are launched, they'll come straight over the North Pole. They're not going to fly all the way around the world. So there's a lot of moving parts with that. With the situation seems to be stable in Venezuela. They got rid of Maduro. They still have a president down there who's not exactly friendly to the United States, but I think this effort we did down there, it might have stymied efforts by China and Russia to get into the Western Hemisphere because they have very powerful militaries, but they can't project themselves by conventional warfare into the Western Hemisphere because of logistical and distance reasons. So, I think Trump is following the Monroe Doctrine. Um, we have there's a lot of weird stuff going on in the world right now, even here in Virginia. Um, I did go to what's called Lobby Day. Every Martin Luther King Jr. Day in Virginia, we have Lobby Day at the Virginia General Assembly. And I'm a member of the Virginia Citizens Defense League. We're a very strong group that promotes the Second Amendment and self-defense. And um, we probably had between 800 and 1,000 people there, which is much better than last year. But the General Assembly is doing a lot of things to infringe upon your right to self-defense. And now we have a strong left-wing majority in both chambers of the state legislature. Well, it's a small majority in the state Senate. It's 21-19. The Democrats are ahead in the state assembly. I think it's 64-36 Democrat lead, and most of them are far left of center. So, and we now have a far left governor, so she'll sign just about any of the legislation. And I could do another video on that, but there's a lot of really, really bad laws that many of them are probably going to be deemed unconstitutional because they go against the Bruin decision from a few years ago, Bruin versus New York. I believe I think it was New York, but they're going to pass these laws anyway, and they're going to drop a few others, like where you have to get a permit in order to buy a firearm, and you'd have to renew it every 5 years. That's an infringement. A lot of these things are infringements, but that's a really bad one. So there's a lot of weird stuff going on, and then with the tariffs thing, there are countries that they may not have a tariff on U.S. goods, but they have impediments in their markets. Like they'll say, well, for an automobile, you can't have such and such a dimension on your windshield, or they do these little things that it amounts to the same thing as a tariff because you have to spend money to get it fixed so that it's acceptable for their standards. I know you don't see very many American cars in Germany. You see some, aside from the ones people over there in the military. But if you want to buy a Ford Mustang as a German citizen, the VAT tax on that car is just unbelievable. It's much higher than any taxes we have on German cars. Now, I'm not saying that the solution is to put taxes on Audis and Volkswagens, because that would hurt Americans. But if we can get the German government and the other European countries, okay, take down your barriers against American products. Don't add a VAT or a port tax or don't disguise it as something else when it really acts the same as a tariff. Even though it's not a tariff, it is a de facto tariff instead of a de jure tariff. So I think Trump is trying to get through to that, but he just does a horrible job with messaging and articulating everything. And when he goes on TV and he says, tariff is my favorite word. Yeah, it's funny, but he's not winning any friends by doing that. He needs to have somebody else articulate exactly what he's trying to do, trying to make things more fair. Also with tariffs, let's say you're in the steel industry. Let's say you work at Bethlehem Steel or United States Steel or somewhere like that. You're going to love tariffs on foreign steel because it makes your company more profitable. You have less foreign competition. That sounds absolutely wonderful to you. But let's say you make cars or you make washing machines. Okay. Now, if you're buying steel, you either have to pay more for imported steel or you have to pay a higher price for American steel, and you're building things that you export. Well, guess what? Now your products just got more expensive on the world market. So Did you save jobs in the steel industry? Maybe in the short term, but you might lose jobs in the auto industry and the production of durable goods. Um, like if you, let's say you make airplanes, okay, you work for McDonnell Douglas or Boeing or something like that. Um, well, if there's tariffs on imported aluminum to make aircraft, now the cost of your plane goes up, and you might have an airline in Saudi Arabia. Well, now buying the Airbus might seem more effective, and I think they're made in France or Germany or Belgium or something. You're buying the Airbus plane instead of the McDonnell Douglas or the Boeing plane. So yes, you save some steel jobs. Now maybe you lose jobs in the aviation industry. These things are not always cut and dry. They have a yin and a yang to them. No offense to anybody who's Chinese, but they have a yin and a yang to them. And when it's like squeezing a balloon. If you blow up a balloon and you squeeze it, you can make it smaller in this end, but it bulges out in the other end. And when you try and manipulate an economy from DC, when you have like centralized planners, which, as Ronald Reagan used to say, the more their plans fail, the more the planners plan. And the government will they'll screw something up, and then they'll need another government program to fix what they screwed up. So many politicians are like somebody who would come up behind you and break your leg. They hit you in the back of the leg and break your leg with a baseball bat. And you're like, oh, and then they would hand you a crutch and say, see, if it weren't for me, you wouldn't be able to walk. That's the way government treats the citizens sometimes. I mean, I could go on and on and on with examples of how that works, but sometimes things that they look nice in theory, they sound great in the classroom when a professor is explaining it to you, but when you put it into real world, it doesn't always come out that way. Something that seems good when you're in the dorm room late at night taking a few bong hits, and then you think, oh, that sounds great, but then when you put it into practice, it fails. You can say that a lot about socialism. It sound and communism too. It sounds altruistic. It sounds awesome. It sounds like everybody's equal. You spread the wealth, but in the real world, it doesn't work that way because your productive people will always seek to leave. Capitalist countries often need walls and fences to keep people out. Communism and socialism, they need fences to keep people in. So there's a lot of crazy stuff going on right now. Um, the midterm elections are coming up in November, and if we don't have riots this summer and the economy is doing well, then the Republicans are probably going to keep the majority in both chambers. If we start having riots and we get into some kind of conflict overseas that takes a long time, or the inflation hits really bad, or we have an economic downturn, which is quite possible, regardless of who the president is, then the party in power is going to get blamed for it. And historically, the party of the president does lose control, or they lose a lot of seats in the midterm elections. So November is only what, 9 months away, 10 months away from now. But politically, that's an eternity. And then can't even begin to talk about 2028. Although I will make a dark horse prediction for 2028 on the Democrat side. Watch out for Mark Kelly. Yeah, the senator who was the astronaut. Watch out for him. He's going to be somebody they're going to bring out who can campaign as a veteran, a patriot, and will campaign as a centrist, but govern as a leftist, sort of like Bill Clinton. Although compared to today's leftists, Bill Clinton would be too conservative to be a Democrat today. And I think in the Republican Party, I don't think people are really on fire for J.D. Vance. I think he's competent, but he doesn't have that chutzpah or whatever you call it. He doesn't have the gravitas. Now, I could be proven wrong. Maybe he'll pull a rabbit out of his hat, but I don't think he inspires that many people. I think Marco Rubio is going to be a formidable candidate, and I think Tulsi Gabbard might jump into the ring, or throw her hat in the ring. On the Democrat side, I think a lot of people are counting on Gavin Newsom, but I think that he's done so much damage in California. I think he'd have a tough time in a nationwide election. I really do. Although the guy can sell it, he could sell a box of rusty razor blades to a hemophiliac, and he could convince a bunch of anaerobic cells to take up residence in an oxygen tent. He does have that. He's got those Hollywood movie star looks. He's got a nice family. You know, he can talk a good game. You know, he could bring some smoke. But I think Mark Kelly is the one to watch. And I also think on the Democrat side, former Governor Roy Cooper from North Carolina. I think the current governor, Andy Beshear in Kentucky, and Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania. I think those guys would be formidable VP candidates for the Democrats. There's no way they're going to run AOC and they're not going to run Harris again. They learned their lesson with that. But I'll wrap it up. It's time to eat lunch. My stomach's growling. I hope everybody has a good day. But just wanted to throw things out there. There's a lot of, you can't trust what the news tells you, but a lot of times you can trust what they don't tell you. Peace and farewell, my friends.